A sweet smile graced his wife's face as she handed the lunch bag to their driver. Tucked inside was a small, handwritten note. "Finish all of this, my love." He never imagined the death he had sent would lose its way. Their driver, accustomed to a different route, had taken it to his boss's mistress's apartment instead. 3 minutes later, the ringing of a telephone would begin the unraveling of the husband himself. Let us begin the story. The soft morning sun filtered through the gaps in the curtains of their large, opulent bedroom window. But the warmth of the day was not enough to melt the ice that had formed over the breakfast table in their home. Grace, a woman whose gentle face radiated peace, was pouring hot espresso into the porcelain cup of her husband, Richard. The steam rising from the cup carried the familiar, robust aroma of dark roast coffee, but Richard didn't even glance her way. Grace was the very definition of a wife most parents dream of for their sons. She was patient, soft-spoken, and her devotion to God was unshakable. Her clean, unadorned face always seemed to glow after her morning prayers. Yet for Richard, all that goodness was just a tedious routine. Richard was busy with his phone, his thumb moving nimbly across the screen. Occasionally, his brow would furrow, followed by a faint smile that would vanish the moment Grace sat down across from him. "Honey, eat your breakfast. It might get cold," Grace said softly, using the term of endearment from their early days. She pushed the plate of steel-cut oatmeal, topped with fresh berries and a side of crispy bacon, closer to him, a breakfast she had prepared since dawn. Richard just scoffed. He placed his phone face down on the table. "I'm not hungry, Grace. How many times do I have to tell you not to bother cooking if I'm not going to eat it? It's a waste of food." The words were sharp, piercing Grace's heart directly. Still, she was accustomed to this kind of pain. She forced a smile, hiding the ache in her chest. "All right, if you don't want to eat, at least drink your coffee, my love. It will warm you up before you head to work." Richard quickly drank the espresso and stood up. As he adjusted his tie, he said, "I'm leaving now. Don't call unless it's important. My schedule is packed today." Grace immediately stood up and took her husband's hand to kiss the back of it, a sign of respect she held onto. Richard allowed it but offered no return caress or kiss on her forehead as a normal husband would. He pulled his hand away the moment her lips touched his skin and walked out of the house without a backward glance. As Richard left, Grace remained frozen in her seat. The large house felt oppressively quiet. Suddenly, her chest tightened. A dark premonition entered her mind, her heart beating faster than usual for no clear reason, as if a storm cloud hung directly over her head, ready to burst at any moment. But as always, Grace pushed aside her anxieties. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and began to pray. "My God, please protect my husband in every step he takes. Keep him away from all harm and worldly temptations. If he has done wrong, please guide him back to your path," she whispered. A single tear fell down her cheek, but she quickly wiped it away, believing a wife's prayer was the strongest shield for her husband, even if he never valued it. Meanwhile, inside a luxurious black sedan speeding through the congested traffic of Manhattan, Richard's mind was a storm of irritation and disgust. It wasn't the work at his firm that was stressing him out, but the incessant messages flooding his phone since last night. Jessica, the woman who had filled Richard's dark days for the past year, had become a nightmare of demands. She was no longer a fun escape. She had started demanding status. Richard's phone vibrated again. A voice message. He made sure the glass partition between the passenger seat and the driver was fully closed so Frank, his personal driver, couldn't hear. He pressed the play button. Jessica's voice was shrill and emotional. "Rick, how much longer do I have to wait? You promised you'd sort everything out with that provincial saint of yours this month. I don't care anymore, honey. If you don't leave Grace soon, I'll go to your house myself and expose everything. And remember, I know about you embezzling funds from the company's pension plan last year. What will it be? Lose Grace, or lose your career and go to prison?" Richard slammed his phone onto the adjacent leather seat, his breath catching in his throat. His face flushed with a mixture of anger and fear. Jessica's threat was no joke. He knew she held all the cards. If the pension scandal came out, it would be the end of him. But divorcing Grace wasn't easy either. Most of their assets, including the Greenwich Mansion and several commercial properties, were inherited by Grace from her late parents. If they divorced, Richard would be kicked out with almost nothing. Richard loved his luxurious lifestyle. He couldn't bear the thought of being poor or starting over from scratch. "Damn it," Richard muttered under his breath. Why did everything have to get so complicated? His mind raced wildly. Jessica wanted marriage and luxury. Grace held the wealth he needed to give Jessica and himself that luxury. The only obstacle to his happiness, according to his twisted logic, was Grace's existence. If Grace died, Richard thought, all her inheritance would go to him as her legal husband. He would be the sole heir since they had no children. With that wealth, he could silence Jessica, marry her, and live peacefully. The insane idea suddenly appeared in his mind like a sweet whisper from a demon. Kill Grace. But how? He wasn't a professional killer. He couldn't hire a hitman. It was too risky and could leave a trail. He needed to do it himself, cleanly, in a way that looked like an accident or a sudden illness. Food poisoning. The idea struck him as he saw a billboard for a high-end Japanese restaurant on the side of the road. Grace loved Japanese food, especially the premium bento from their favorite restaurant back when they were still happy. Grace also had a sensitive stomach. If she ate something bad, people would easily believe it was just simple food poisoning or a severe case of gastritis. Richard felt the inner pocket of his suit jacket. Inside was a small vial containing a clear liquid he had acquired from an acquaintance on the dark web weeks ago. Initially, he had bought the potent liquid poison just to deal with pests in the office warehouse. But the chemical was odorless and tasteless when mixed with strongly flavored food. The demon in his mind rejoiced. The plan formed perfectly within seconds. He would buy Grace lunch. This sudden act of sweetness would disarm her. The innocent Grace would surely think he was trying to fix their relationship. "Frank," Richard called through the car's intercom, his voice cold and emotionless. "Yes, sir," Frank replied from the front. "Before we go to the office, let's stop by Kiku Grand on Park Avenue." "I'm buying lunch," Richard ordered. "Yes, sir," Frank answered obediently. Richard leaned back in his seat, his eyes staring into nothingness outside the window. His heart had turned to stone. Not a shred of pity for the woman who had kissed his hand and prayed for him that very morning. In Richard's mind, Grace was an obstacle that had to be removed. Today, his decision was made. Today would be the last day Grace breathed in this world, and the first day of Richard's imagined freedom. The sleek black sedan pulled smoothly into the parking lot of Kiku Grand, a high-class Japanese restaurant that served food of the highest quality at prices that could empty your wallet. In the early, sweeter days of their marriage, Richard often brought Grace here. She always ordered the same thing, the Emperor's bento with black cod teriyaki and miso soup. Richard got out of the car, straightened his suit jacket, and walked into the restaurant with firm steps. He was met by the cool air from the air conditioning and the smell of grilled meat. A waiter in a formal uniform greeted him politely. "One Emperor's bento, black cod teriyaki set." "To go," Richard said without emotion, not returning the waiter's smile. "Of course, sir." "Just a moment," the waiter replied courteously. While waiting, Richard tapped his fingers on the counter. His heart pounded, not with excitement for the delicious food, but with the adrenaline of the evil plan he was executing. He looked around, making sure he didn't know anyone. He felt as if all eyes were on him, even though the other customers were busy with their own affairs. Soon, his order was ready. An elegant bag containing a high-quality bento box, complete with chopsticks and wet wipes. Richard paid with his credit card and immediately returned to the car. "Let's go, Frank. Find a quiet parking spot in the office park for a moment. I need to make an important call to a client." "I need some quiet," Richard ordered Frank as he got in. A fabricated excuse. "Yes, sir," Frank nodded, the loyal driver who had served him for nearly 10 years. He drove the car to a parking area behind an office building, a quiet spot surrounded by trees. After the car stopped and the engine was turned off, Richard again closed the glass partition between them. He made sure the rear window curtains were drawn, creating a private, dark space hidden from the outside world. With trembling hands, Richard opened the bento bag. The delicious aroma of grilled cod and sticky Japanese rice filled the car. The food looked exquisite. A glossy slice of cod from the teriyaki sauce, a fresh salad, tamagoyaki, a Japanese rolled omelet, and a bowl of miso soup still hot in a sealed container. Richard took a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves. He took out the small vial from his suit jacket's inner pocket, a clear, unlabeled bottle containing the deadly liquid. He also took out a small syringe he had prepared earlier. Carefully, Richard drew the poison into the syringe. A cold sweat broke out on his brow. A single drop was enough to cause severe stomach pain, but a full syringe would stop a heart within hours, he recalled the seller's explanation. He inserted the needle between the thick flesh of the cod, injecting a portion of the liquid there, letting it seep into the fibers of the meat, hidden by the dark color of the teriyaki sauce. The rest he injected into the miso soup container through a small hole in the lid, then gently shook it to mix. The poison's slight odor would be masked by the strong smell of garlic and ginger in the teriyaki sauce. Visually, nothing had changed. The food still looked delicious, luxurious, and harmless. But behind that deliciousness lay a one-way ticket to death. Afterwards, Richard hid the vial and syringe back in his briefcase. He wiped the cold sweat from his temples with a tissue. His heart was pounding, a mix of fear of being caught and a perverse satisfaction that his plan was succeeding. The final step to perfect his show was a sweet message. Richard took a pen and a yellow sticky note he always carried. He thought for a moment, crafting words that would soften Grace's heart and remove any suspicion. His hand began to write, his penmanship neat but forced. "I'm sorry I've been so busy and stressed lately. This lunch is special for you, my love. Finish it all so you stay healthy. Love, Rick." Richard stuck the note right on top of the bento box lid. He reread his words and smirked. The phrase, "my love," felt like an insult. It was so easy to manipulate the feelings of a woman like Grace, he thought. She would surely be touched by this message, thinking it was a sincere apology, and would eat the food down to the last bite as a sign of appreciation for her husband. "Perfect," Richard whispered. He rearranged the bag to look as if it had just come from the restaurant. He composed himself, putting on his usual serious and authoritative face. He pressed the intercom. "Frank, I'm done. Now we're—" Richard paused and looked at his watch. He had to attend an important meeting in 15 minutes. He had no time to go home and deliver the food personally. If he went home, he might be late and raise questions at the office. Besides, if he wasn't there when Grace ate it, his alibi would be stronger. He could feign shock when he received the news of his wife's death. That thought solidified his plan. He would order Frank to deliver it. "Frank!" Richard called again, this time with a tone of urgency. "Ready, sir," Frank replied. Richard opened the partition slightly, just enough to pass the bag to the front. His hands were still cold as he held the luxurious bag. This was the decisive moment. Once this bag was handed over, Grace's fate was sealed. "Take this to the house. Right now," Richard commanded, deliberately emphasizing the word house. To him, the house meant their legal residence in Greenwich, where he wanted his wife's body to be found. But in his nervousness and rush due to the impending meeting, Richard forgot a crucial detail about his habits over the last few months, a small detail that would upend the entire evil plan he had so carefully constructed. The atmosphere inside the black sedan was thick with tension, especially for Richard, who was battling his own mind. On the plush, soft back seat, he sat stiff and upright. Beads of cold sweat still seeped through his expensive suit, even with the car's air conditioning set to its coldest. In his lap, the leather briefcase containing the poison vial and the used syringe felt like a heavy stone. But in his right hand, the poisoned bento bag seemed hotter than burning coal. Richard glanced at his Rolex. Time was running out mercilessly. The hands of the watch showed 12:10 p.m. The board of directors meeting with the foreign investors was scheduled to start at exactly 12:30. He couldn't be late. Being late would only invite questions, and questions were the last thing he wanted right now. He had to get this time bomb, disguised as food, out of his hands immediately, but he had to do it in a way that seemed natural. He stared at Frank's back through the slightly open glass partition. Frank, a loyal driver in the prime of his life, seemed to be calmly navigating out of the quiet parking area and onto the main road. Richard took a deep breath, trying to summon his remaining courage and authority as a boss. His voice must not tremble. His face must not show panic. "Frank," Richard called. His voice was hoarse, so he had to clear his throat. "Ahem, Frank." "Yes, sir?" "Are we going straight to the office?" Frank asked, glancing at the rearview mirror, noticing his boss looked a bit pale. "Yes, to the lobby of my office building. Drop me off there," Richard answered quickly. "But after that, don't park at the office. You have something important to do." The car navigated the streets of New York, which were starting to get congested during lunchtime. The horns of other vehicles echoed in the distance, adding to Richard's anxiety. He felt every passing second was like a knife slicing through his patience. Richard stared at the bento bag again. The message, "Finish this, my love," that he had written on the small yellow paper, seemed to be staring back at him, mocking his evil intent. "What do I need to do, sir?" Frank's polite question cut through Richard's thoughts. Richard passed the bento bag through the partition opening. His hand trembled slightly, but he disguised it with a quick, almost rough gesture. "This," Richard said curtly. "Take this to the house. Right now. Don't delay." Frank accepted the bag with his left hand while still holding the steering wheel with his right. He felt the warmth from the food container. The delicious smell of teriyaki was faintly detectable. Frank's brow furrowed in confusion. "To the house, sir?" Frank repeated, just to be sure. For him, this was a natural question because his boss lived two different lives. There was the large house in an elite Connecticut suburb where Mrs. Grace lived, and there was a luxury apartment in the heart of the city where Miss Jessica lived. Usually, when Richard said he was going home, the destination depended on the day and his mood. Richard, anxious and pressed for time, was irritated by Frank's question. His volatile emotions flared up instantly. Why did this old driver have to ask questions at such a critical moment? Richard was afraid that if he specified Grace's name, it would seem odd, as he hadn't sent food to his legal wife in months. He wanted to sound casual, as if this were a regular occurrence. "To the house! To the place where the person who's always waiting for my return is," Richard shouted, his eyes glaring. "Give it to her and tell her it's a special lunch from me. Tell her to eat it right away while it's still hot. Do you understand?" Richard intentionally used the phrase, "the person who's always waiting for my return," to refer to Grace from his memory before he started cheating. Grace would always wait for his return in the living room, greeting him with a smile and a glass of cold water. Richard assumed that the image of a waiting wife was still clear in Frank's mind as the definition of his legal family. Richard had forgotten that people change, and routines can alter perceptions. "Yes, sir. I understand, sir," Frank answered nervously, startled by the outburst. He didn't dare ask any more questions. He knew Richard's temper these days was as short as a firecracker. Asking more could get him fired. Finally, the sedan stopped at the entrance of the luxurious office building where Richard worked. A doorman quickly opened the passenger door. Richard got out immediately, adjusted his suit, and grabbed his briefcase. Before closing the car door, Richard bent down slightly, looking at Frank with an expression he tried to make strict, but that was tinged with urgency. "Remember, don't make any stops. Deliver it immediately. Make sure she receives it and eats it," Richard instructed again, ensuring his murder plot would succeed. "When you get there and she's eaten it, text me. Don't call. I have a meeting." "Yes, sir. It will be done," Frank replied. Richard slammed the car door shut. He stood for a moment on the lobby sidewalk, taking a deep breath as if a 100-pound weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He watched his sedan slowly pull away from the lobby, carrying the deadly poison that would end his marriage. A cold, forced smile appeared on Richard's lips. "Goodbye, Grace," he whispered to the wind. "I hope you enjoy your last lunch." With a light step filled with false confidence, Richard entered the skyscraper. He felt like a winner. He felt brilliant. He didn't realize that the single, ambiguous word house had just turned the wheel of fate in a direction he never expected. In his mind, the scenario of Grace's death was perfectly laid out. But in Frank's mind, the order was being processed with a different logic. As Richard stepped into the elevator, heading to the 30th floor, Frank was driving out of the office complex. The bento bag sat on the passenger seat beside him, a seemingly harmless package with a beautiful ribbon and an enticing aroma, but containing a death waiting for its victim. Frank drove calmly, but his mind was working hard to interpret his boss's mysterious order. Frank skillfully maneuvered the steering wheel, weaving between buses and taxis, congesting the streets of Manhattan. However, his mind was not entirely on the road. He occasionally glanced at the luxurious bento bag resting on the adjacent seat. The bag looked exclusive. Clearly, this wasn't just any food. The name Kiku Grand, elegantly written on the box, hinted at a price probably equivalent to his weekly grocery budget. "Give it to the person who's always waiting for me," Frank mumbled, repeating his boss's order, his brow furrowed deeply. As a driver who had served for almost 10 years, Frank knew the secrets of his boss's life all too well. He was the silent witness to Richard's drastic change. Before, the word house referred to only one place, a modern classic-style mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut, where Mrs. Grace lived. Back then, Frank often drove Richard there on time and would frequently see Mrs. Grace greeting them on the porch. But that was the story from 2 years ago. In the last 6 months, the meaning of going home for Richard had completely changed. Frank recalled his schedule. Almost every day after office hours, Richard no longer asked to be taken to Greenwich. Richard always asked to be taken to a condominium in Midtown where Miss Jessica lived. Often, Richard would even sleep there and just ask to be driven straight to the office in the morning without even stopping by Mrs. Grace's house to change clothes. Richard had plenty of spare clothes stored in the car or at Jessica's apartment. "Sir said, the person who's always waiting for me," Frank thought, braking at a traffic light. He tried to use his simple logic. Poor Mrs. Grace, Frank thought sadly. He recalled the few times he had driven Richard to Greenwich in the past month, just to pick up documents. Mrs. Grace wasn't waiting at the door. Usually, she was already asleep or praying in her room or busy with her social activities. Their relationship had become very cold. Richard would enter that house without a smile and leave with a frown. So clearly, Mrs. Grace was not the person eagerly waiting. In contrast, the image of Miss Jessica appeared in Frank's mind. Every time Frank's car stopped at the condo lobby in Midtown, Jessica was often already there, or would run to greet Richard as the elevator door opened. She always greeted Richard with a warm hug, laughter, and demands for attention. Jessica was the person who was always waiting. Frank glanced at the bento bag again, his eyes fixed on the yellow sticky note attached to the top. Richard's handwriting was clear. "Finish this, my love." The words, "my love." That was the key to Frank's confusion. Aha! "Of course," Frank whispered to himself, feeling enlightened. Sir wrote, "my love." It's impossible he would call Mrs. Grace, "my love." When he talks to her, his tone is always high, like he's fighting. He's only ever sweet to Miss Jessica, calling her, "my love" and "honey." "I'm 70'd. Frank's logic was working, based on what he saw and heard every day. To him, it was impossible for Richard to suddenly be sweet to Grace by sending expensive food and an affectionate message, especially after a big fight Frank had accidentally overheard on the phone the other day. On the other hand, Frank knew that yesterday Richard and Jessica had a small argument in the car because Jessica was demanding a new designer bag. So, it made sense that Richard was sending this food as a way to appease Jessica. This is definitely for Miss Jessica. It's Sir's way of apologizing, Frank concluded with confidence. He nodded to himself, proud that he understood his boss's hint. "If I deliver this to Mrs. Grace, Sir might get angry. I could even get fired for going to the wrong address." He even said, "Don't ask too many questions. That means I have to be sharp." The traffic light turned green. Frank stepped on the gas. At the intersection ahead, there were 2 paths. The left went toward the highway to Connecticut, to Grace's house. The right road led to the FDR Drive, towards Midtown and Jessica's apartment. Without hesitation, Frank turned the steering wheel to the right. The car headed up the ramp, moving away from Grace's house, which was now only about 20 minutes away from their position, and sped towards Jessica's apartment, a 40-minute drive from there. Fate, through the hands of a simple driver just trying to do his job right, had just diverted the path of death. Throughout the drive, Frank was at ease, thinking Miss Jessica would surely be happy to receive this. Usually, when Miss Jessica was happy, she gave Frank a big tip. "This will be a big help. Extra money to buy milk for my grandson," he thought innocently. Meanwhile, the poisoned bento beside him jiggled slightly with the movement of the car. The deadly liquid, already mixed into the miso soup and the fibers of the cod, was now on its way to a target its sender had never intended. Half an hour later, Frank's car arrived at the entrance of Jessica's luxury apartment building. The tower was tall, its glass windows reflecting the sunlight. Frank rolled down his window as a security guard approached. "Just delivering a package for Miss Jessica, on the 15th floor." "From Mr. Richard," Frank told the guard, who recognized him. "Oh, sure, Frank. You can park in the lobby for a moment." "It's not too busy," the guard replied politely. Frank parked the car and carefully took the bento bag. He entered the cool, fragrant lobby and headed to the elevator, pressing the button for the 15th floor. The elevator ascended quickly, carrying Death neatly wrapped in a Japanese food box. Inside the elevator, Frank straightened his uniform, wanting to look presentable when he delivered his boss's order. The elevator chimed and opened on the 15th floor. The hallway was quiet and thickly carpeted. Frank walked to unit number 15B and rang the doorbell twice. Soon, he heard footsteps from inside. The door opened. Jessica stood there, dressed in comfortable loungewear but still looking fashionable. Her eyes were slightly puffy, a remnant of yesterday's annoyance, but they immediately lit up when she saw who had arrived. It wasn't Frank she saw, but the bag with the logo of her favorite restaurant in his hand. "Hey, Frank, what's this?" Jessica asked, her voice becoming curious. Frank smiled politely as he handed her the bag. "Good afternoon, Miss Jessica. Sir sent you some lunch. He said it's special for you. He said you should eat it right away while it's still hot." Jessica's eyes widened. She recognized the bento box from Kiku Grand and knew how expensive that food was. But what made her heart leap was the yellow paper stuck to it. Jessica took the bag and read the message. "I'm sorry I've been so busy. This lunch is special for you, my love. Love, Rick." A triumphant smile spread across Jessica's face. Her anger at Richard instantly vanished. She felt so loved, felt that Richard finally understood what she wanted. The words, "my love" and "love" were the proof she was looking for. "Oh, Rick is so sweet," Jessica cooed, her cheeks blushing. She looked at Frank with a happy face. "Thank you so much, Frank. You're so kind today." "You're welcome, ma'am. Sir said you should finish it all," Frank added, innocently passing on the message of Death. "Of course! Please tell Rick thank you. I'm going to eat this right now. It's perfect. I haven't eaten since this morning." Just thinking about him, Jessica laughed. She took a $50 bill from her pocket and gave it to Frank. "Here, this is for you, for coffee." "Wow, thank you so much, ma'am," Frank said happily and took his leave. Jessica closed her apartment door with a celebratory heart. She brought the bento to the marble table by the window with a view of the city. She sat down, opened the bento lid, and inhaled the delicious aroma. Without any suspicion, Jessica picked up the chopsticks. She first sipped the miso soup, then took a large bite of the black cod teriyaki laced with a deadly poison. "So good," Jessica said as she chewed, eating with gusto, savoring every bite while imagining she would soon be the one and only Mrs. Richard. She didn't know that every bite that entered her throat was counting down the remaining hours of her life. Down below, Frank returned to the car with a light heart. Job done. He took out his phone and typed a text message to Richard as instructed. "Sir, the package has been delivered. It was received happily and is being eaten now. I'll be on standby down here." The message sent. Frank leaned back, turned on the radio, and whistled softly, unaware that the message he had just sent would be the death knell for his own boss. While Frank's car was speeding away from Greenwich with its deadly package, the atmosphere in Richard and Grace's large house was quiet and peaceful, a world away from the turmoil Richard was feeling at his office or the false joy Jessica was feeling in her apartment. Grace was kneeling on her prayer mat in their small prayer room. The wall clock showed 12:30 p.m., the time when the sun was at its peak. Usually, this was lunchtime, but that day was a Monday, and Grace was fasting, a practice she had long adopted to calm her often troubled soul due to her husband's cold treatment. "Ma'am Grace, you should rest for a bit." The gentle voice of Rosa, their housekeeper whom they considered family, came from the doorway. Grace turned around. Her face was a bit pale, but a sincere smile was still on her lips. She neatly folded her white prayer veil. "Yes, Rosa. I'm just finishing my prayers." Rosa entered with a tray holding a glass of water for later and some pain medicine. The old woman's face was full of concern. "Does your tooth still hurt, ma'am? You've been holding your cheek all morning. Later, after you break your fast, don't eat anything hard, okay?" Grace touched her right cheek. It was true. Her molar had been throbbing since the morning. The pain radiated to her head, making her lose her appetite. Even if she weren't fasting, she doubted she could swallow solid food. "Yes, Rosa, it still hurts a bit. It's a good thing I'm fasting, so it's 2 birds with 1 stone. Oh, Rosa, are the boxes of rice and canned goods for the youth shelter ready in the back?" "Yes, ma'am. Carlos, the gardener, has already loaded most of them into the van. You can just check them." Grace nodded. She stood up and smoothed her long house dress. "Thank God. My plan was to deliver them myself this afternoon so I could have dinner with the kids there. It's too quiet in this house when I'm alone." Grace walked to the back of the house, passing through the empty dining room. She glanced at the long table that had witnessed her husband's harshness that morning. A small pang of pain hit her heart as she remembered Richard leaving without a proper goodbye. But she quickly dismissed the feeling, believing that patience was the key to heaven. Unbeknownst to Grace, fate was moving in a mysterious way to protect her. If Frank hadn't misunderstood the order and had actually delivered the poisoned bento to this house, Grace wouldn't have eaten it that afternoon because she was fasting. And if she had saved it for dinner, her toothache would have prevented her from chewing the fleshy cod, and she might have given the food to someone else or thrown it away because it was cold. But divine protection was even more thorough. The food was never even allowed to approach the gates of Grace's home. The angel of death sent by Richard seemed to have gotten lost at an intersection and taken a different turn, away from the woman busy thinking about the welfare of orphans. As Grace was checking the rice and oil in the backyard, she suddenly felt a cool breeze brush against her face. The heavy feeling and tightness in her chest she had felt that morning, the bad premonition that had unsettled her, suddenly vanished. She felt light, as if an invisible heavy burden had been lifted from her shoulders. Grace paused for a moment, holding her chest. "My God," she whispered, "why do I suddenly feel so light? As if I just escaped through the eye of a needle." "What is it, ma'am?" Carlos asked, lifting a box of instant noodles. Grace shook her head, smiling. "Nothing, Carlos. Just a feeling. Please, continue, so we can get there before 3. At that very same moment, miles away, Richard's murder plot had found its target, but Grace remained under the protection of her prayers and good deeds, completely untouched by her husband's evil plan, busy doing good while her husband was busy creating his own destruction. Grace went back inside the house to get her purse. She passed the large wedding portrait hanging in the living room. In the picture, Richard and she were smiling happily. Grace stared at Richard's face in the photo with sadness, but still with love. "May God soften your heart, my love," she whispered. She didn't know that the man she was praying for had just plotted to take her life hours ago. Grace's ignorance was a blessing that day. She left the house with a clean heart, heading to the car that would take her to share happiness with the children at the shelter, leaving behind the house that was supposed to be a crime scene but remained a safe palace for her. In the sky above that house, it was as if an invisible shield was repelling evil, returning the negative energy to its sender, or to whoever was complicit in the cruelty. And on that day, the evil energy found a new vessel, Jessica. The midday sun pierced through the glass windows of the 15th floor apartment, but thanks to the air conditioning, Jessica's unit was cool and comfortable. On the shiny marble table, the premium bento box from Kiku Grand lay open, displaying its delicious contents. Jessica was sitting with her legs crossed, her latest smartphone in her left hand and chopsticks in her right. Before touching the food, her ritual was to take a photo. She took several flattering angles, highlighting the thick slice of cod, the colorful salad, and, of course, the yellow sticky note with Richard's handwriting that said, "Finish this, my love." She uploaded the photo to her private Instagram story, setting it to be seen only by her close friends. She added a bold caption, "Finally, lunch from hubby. Such a mood booster after yesterday's drama. Love you, Rick." Jessica smiled with satisfaction as she saw her post. She felt like she had won. She imagined Grace in her big, lonely house, probably eating fried fish or some simple soup while she was indulging in the premium bento sent by Richard. A feeling of superiority filled her chest. She felt she was the true winner of Richard's heart. "Time to eat," Jessica said happily to herself. She picked up a large piece of black cod teriyaki with her chopsticks. The thick, glossy teriyaki sauce coated the fish. Without hesitation, she put it in her mouth. The taste of salt, sweetness, and savoriness from the teriyaki sauce exploded on her tongue. The soft texture of the cod melted in her mouth. Delicious, but there was a faint trace of bitterness, so subtle it was almost unnoticeable, that lingered on the tip of her tongue after she swallowed. Jessica's brow furrowed slightly. Why does it taste a bit bitter? Maybe it was just slightly burnt during grilling, she thought, dismissing it. Her hunger and joy overshadowed the sensitivity of her palate. She ignored the strange taste and took another bite of rice. Bite after bite entered her body. The chemical poison Richard had injected began to work, rapidly spreading through her bloodstream to her central nervous system and vital organs. Jessica ate with gusto while replying to messages from her friends, who were praising how thoughtful Richard was. She finished half the cod and almost all the miso soup. The hot soup felt comforting in her stomach, but only for the first 5 minutes. Suddenly, the phone in Jessica's hand dropped onto the table with a loud clatter. Ouch! Jessica was startled. Her hand had gone numb and stiff. She tried to pick up her phone again, but her fingers were trembling so much they felt powerless. The comfort in her stomach suddenly turned into a searing pain, as if an invisible hand was squeezing her intestines. Cold sweat, the size of corn kernels, began to appear on her forehead and neck within seconds. "Arg! It hurts!" Jessica cried out. She clutched her stomach with both hands, bending over to endure the pain. At first, she thought it was just a simple ulcer from skipping a meal. But this pain was different. It wasn't the simple sting of an empty stomach. It was a hot, burning pain that rose from her stomach to her throat. She started to have trouble breathing. Her chest felt heavy, as if a large stone was crushing her lungs. Jessica tried to stand up to get water from the kitchen, but her legs gave way. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the cold marble floor. The chair toppled over, creating a loud noise in the quiet apartment. "Help!" Her voice was choked. Her tongue felt thick and immobile. Her vision began to blur and spin, as if she were on a very fast Ferris wheel. The objects around her, the sofa, the TV, the window, began to lose shape. An intense fear crept into Jessica's mind. "What's happening to me? What was wrong with the food?" Her mind screamed in terror. The image of Richard appeared in her mind. The bento, the note with my love. Was it spoiled? Impossible. Kiku Grand was known for its quality. Was it poison? Jessica's brain refused to believe it, but her body was reacting truthfully. She was poisoned. With her remaining strength, Jessica crawled toward her phone under the table. Her fingers, starting to turn blue and stiff, tried to unlock the screen. Her breathing was a wheezing sound, like someone being strangled. Saliva began to drool from the side of her mouth. She had to call someone. Who? Richard? Richard needed to know. Richard had to help her. Jessica tapped on the contact My Love Rick in her recent calls and pressed the call button. On the other end, Richard was in the middle of an important meeting. His phone was on silent mode in his suit pocket. No answer. "Rick, help!" Jessica whispered faintly. Tears of despair streamed down her now deathly pale cheeks. The call disconnected. Jessica tried again. This time, she tried to press the emergency button or the number for the condo's front desk, but the coordination between her brain and hands was gone. Her vision went dark. The pain in her stomach had reached a point where she was numb. Jessica's body convulsed several times on the cold floor of her luxurious apartment. The bento bag on the table became a silent witness, with leftover food that still looked delicious and a message of love that had now become a death sentence. In her last moments of consciousness, Jessica saw the yellow paper fly off the table, carried by the breeze from the air conditioner, and land right in front of her prostrate face. "Finish this, my love." The irony hit Jessica harder than the physical pain. She felt betrayed and discarded by Rick. The man she thought loved her had sent death for her, or was it really meant for Grace? The question would never be answered. Jessica's consciousness slowly faded, swallowed by darkness. Her body stopped convulsing, now rigid in a pitiful position. Silence returned to the room. Only the hum of the refrigerator and the whir of the air conditioner could be heard, along with the lifeless body of the woman who had been the other woman. The deadly package had found its victim. Even if it wasn't the right one, fate has its own way of delivering justice. And on that day, Jessica paid a high price for her position as the wrong house to come home to. Meanwhile, on the screen of Jessica's phone, still dimly lit on the floor, a text notification from Richard came through. The message Richard had secretly sent from under the meeting table after receiving the update from Frank. How was the food? Was it good? Make sure you finish it so it doesn't go to waste. The message glowed brightly next to Jessica's unconscious face, a final, chilling insult. The clock in the executive conference room showed 1 p.m. The atmosphere inside was formal and cold. High-level company officials and foreign investors were seriously discussing profit projections for the next quarter. Graphs and numbers were displayed on the projector screen. But for Richard, all of it was just meaningless lines. Richard sat at the end of the table. As a director, he had to look respectable, but under his expensive suit, his body was soaked in cold sweat. His foot tapped incessantly on the floor, a sign of nervousness he was trying to hide under the table. His mind was flying far away from the meeting, to his house in Greenwich. The poison should be working by now. Rosa or another housekeeper should have found Grace lying on the floor. My phone should ring any moment now with the sad news I've been waiting for. Richard imagined his scenario. He would answer the phone with a shocked expression, then apologize for leaving the meeting due to a family emergency. He would go home, pretend to cry over his wife's body, then refuse an autopsy due to religious reasons or because he couldn't bear it, and finally, he would be free. Grace's wealth would be his, and he could marry Jessica without any obstacles. Mr. Richard, what are your thoughts on this marketing strategy? One of the investors asked, cutting through Richard's thoughts. Richard was startled. He cleared his throat, trying to regain his focus. "Ah, yes, I agree. Just proceed according to the plan," he answered vaguely, not really knowing what was asked. The other attendees exchanged glances, but no one dared to complain. Suddenly, the silence of the meeting was shattered by the loud ringing of Richard's cell phone. The standard ringtone sounded like a scream in Richard's ears. His heart pounded so fast it felt like it would burst out of his chest. "This is it," Richard thought. "It's showtime." He looked at his phone screen. It wasn't their home number or Rosa's, but an unknown number, a local landline. Richard's brow furrowed. "Maybe it's from the hospital near us," he thought. Richard's hand trembled as he answered the call. He brought the phone to his ear as all eyes in the meeting focused on him. "Hello, is this Mr. Richard?" a woman's voice asked from the other end. Her tone was fast and urgent. The background noise was filled with sirens and people shouting the typical sound of an emergency room. "Yes, this is he." "Who is this?" Richard asked, trying to keep his voice calm. "We're from the ER at Mount Sinai Hospital. Sir, we're calling you because your number was the last one called from the victim's cell phone," the woman said without preamble. "Your acquaintance is in critical condition due to severe food poisoning." A slight smile almost formed on Richard's lips. Success, he thought. Grace is in the hospital, just waiting for the news of her death. My God, Richard began his fake concern. My wife. How is my wife? There was a moment of silence on the other end. The woman seemed confused. Wife? I'm sorry, sir. The victim's identification we found in her wallet doesn't seem to be your wife. The victim is a Miss Jessica Collins. Richard's world stopped spinning at that moment. His face, which had been feigning concern, turned deathly pale. His eyes widened, his pupils constricting as if all the blood had drained from his face. What? Richard whispered, his voice barely audible. Who did you say? Miss Jessica Collins, sir. She was found unconscious in her condo unit by security. They said she ate a packed lunch. The poison is very potent, sir. You need to come here immediately, because her condition is... Richard couldn't hear the rest of what the woman was saying. His ears were ringing. Jessica? Why Jessica? Didn't I order Frank to deliver it to the house, to Grace? The pieces of memory flashed through his mind, his order from earlier. Take it to the house. Give it to the person who's always waiting for me." Richard staggered back, his legs weakened, unable to support his weight. He fell back into his chair, almost dropping his phone. "Mr. Richard, are you all right?" his colleague next to him asked, concerned about the sudden change in their boss's face. Richard didn't answer. He was gasping for breath. Cold sweat dripped from his temples. His mind was in chaos. He had planned to kill his wife for his mistress. But fate, and his own stupidly vague order, had diverted death to the woman he loved or the woman he wanted. "Sir, hello, Mr. Richard? We need your consent for some medical procedures," the voice on the phone said again. Richard snapped out of his shock. An intense fear enveloped him. Not just the fear of losing Jessica, but the fear of the legal consequences that were now gaping at him. "Okay, I'm on my way," Richard stammered. He hung up and immediately stood up, ignoring the puzzled looks of his colleagues. "The meeting is over. I have an emergency," Richard shouted hoarsely. Without waiting for a reply, he ran out of the room like a madman, leaving his briefcase behind, his suit jacket wrinkled. Inside the elevator, Richard punched the wall. "Stupid! Stupid! That damn Frank!" he cursed, tears of frustration and fear in his eyes. The image of Jessica dying from the poison he himself had prepared haunted him. He ran to his car in the parking garage but remembered Frank wasn't there. He was waiting at Jessica's condo. He had to drive himself or take a taxi. He frantically hailed a taxi in front of the lobby. Throughout the ride, Richard prayed in irony for someone who had just planned to kill. He prayed that Jessica would be saved and that his crime would not be traced. But deep down, Richard knew it was the end. The food, the handwritten note, his driver, all the evidence pointed to him. The hallway of the Mount Sinai emergency room had a strong smell of disinfectant mixed with the scent of blood and anxiety. The bright white lights intensified the tension. Richard ran down the hall, breathless, looking for Jessica. In front of the resuscitation room, Richard suddenly froze. His feet felt nailed to the floor. There, in the waiting area, sat Frank with a pale, frightened face. Next to him stood 2 police officers, and what made Richard's heart stop was the woman standing calmly beside the police. It was Grace, his legal wife, the woman who was supposed to be dead by now. Grace stood there, dressed in a simple dress. Her face showed deep sadness, but also an extraordinary strength. There were no signs of poisoning on her. She was healthy. Richard's knees went weak. He wanted to turn and run, but the police had already seen him. "There he is! That's Mr. Richard!" Frank shouted when he saw his boss, his voice trembling with a mix of relief and fear. The 2 police officers immediately approached Richard. He backed away but hit the wall. He was cornered. "Are you Mr. Richard Stanton?" one of the police officers asked with emphasis. Richard swallowed. His throat was completely dry. He looked at Grace, hoping for some sympathy there. But Grace just looked at him with a coldness he had never seen before, the look of a wife whose patience had finally run out. "Yes, that's me," Richard answered weakly. "We need to take your statement regarding the case of attempted murder which resulted in the death of the victim, Miss Jessica Collins. 10 minutes ago," the police officer said. "Dead." The word hit Richard like a sledgehammer. His world crumbled. Jessica was dead. The woman he had fought for in such a dirty way was gone, dead by his own hands. "Impossible," Richard whispered. His tears began to fall. It was an accident. Simple food poisoning. The police officer held up a plastic evidence bag. Inside were the bento box and the yellow sticky note. "Your driver, Frank, has already given a preliminary statement. He said you ordered him to deliver this food with special instructions. And this," the officer pointed to the paper, "is in your handwriting, isn't it? Finish this, my love. Forensics has already secured the remaining food, which contains a high dose of cyanide." Richard stared at the yellow paper. His own handwriting had become his sentence. He couldn't deny it. Frank, in his simplicity, had told them everything. How Richard had forced him to deliver it to the house where someone was waiting, how he was forbidden from asking questions. Richard turned to Grace. "Grace, help me. Grace, this is just a misunderstanding. I had no ill intentions." Grace slowly approached him. She didn't shout or curse. She just took a deep breath. "Richard," Grace called softly. Frank called me earlier, confused and crying, because Jessica started convulsing after eating the lunch from you. He thought he had made a mistake in the delivery and had harmed someone. Grace looked into her husband's eyes, but when I saw the evidence, I realized, Richard, Frank didn't go to the wrong address. The food arrived at the right address, the address destined by fate. If he had delivered that to our house, I would probably be the one in the morgue right now. Grace shook her head. You wanted to kill me, Richard? Just for wealth and for another woman? Richard fell to his knees on the cold hospital floor. His defenses collapsed. He sobbed, not out of remorse, but for the destruction of his life. He regretted that his plan had failed. He regretted giving the wrong order. Forgive me, Grace. I'm sorry, Richard wailed. The law of man will judge you, Richard. And the law of God is waiting, Grace said sternly. She turned to the police. Please do your job. I will serve as a witness that my husband did not come home this afternoon and did not send any food to me. The police officer nodded. Mr. Richard Stanton, you are under arrest on suspicion of premeditated murder. The sound of the handcuffs clicking on his wrists was the most painful sound Richard had ever heard. The police pulled him to his feet. People in the hallway watched him with disgust. The successful businessman was now a pathetic murderer. As Richard was being led away, he looked back. He saw Grace calming Frank, who was still in shock. Grace looked so radiant, protected by her goodness and her prayers. Meanwhile, Richard would spend the rest of his life behind bars, haunted by the image of Jessica dying from the poison he himself had mixed. Jessica was gone, taking Richard's dirty dreams with her. Richard had lost everything: his position, wealth, freedom, and the faithful wife he had long ignored. The painful plot twist for Richard was the fact that the wrong address was actually the most correct address for a betrayal. Evil will always find a way to destroy its own creator. Grace walked out of the hospital with a light step. Though her heart was wounded by her husband's cruelty, she was grateful that God had given her a chance to live. She would file for divorce, claim the inheritance from her parents, and continue her life with more meaningful things. The afternoon sun greeted Grace, warm and bright, a sign of a new beginning, cleansed from the poison of the past.